welcome to another exciting edition of 4020 Not Live. It is the 13th of May. Traditionally, around this time, of course, we'd have the Cup Final. I've posted loads of programmes over the last few days with Cup Finals, Phil. Were you there in 78 when Leeds won against St Helens?
I was. That was my third Cup Final that I think I'd attended live by then. But yes, a very, very strange final, which until St Helens played Bradford in 1996, 6 or 7, was the biggest comeback when St Helens were 10-0 up after about 5 minutes, and Leeds somehow managed to beat them. And right at the last minute, when Leeds thought they'd done everything to claw back and win, Saints had the final chance of the game and knocked on.
Were you there in time for the community singing with Bernard Manning?
Oh, I think I would have been enjoying that at the tender teenage age I was probably at, waving my Union Jack bowler hat, no doubt, and a song sheet from the Daily Express with a rosette pinned proudly to my chest and probably a rattle.
Does the Daily Express know Rugby League exists anymore?
No.
I mean, I'm not going to mention who the celebrity guest was for the schoolboys match, but I've posted it on Twitter today so people can see who it was. Do you remember who it was without naming them?
If it wasn't Ed Stewpot Stewart, no. I know he was doing it one year.
It was not Ed Stewpot Stewart, but he's someone who used to get pizzas across the road from you.
I suspect that's who you're alluding to.
Welcome to the program in a week in which someone called us professional. So hopefully we've dispelled that myth within the first 2 minutes of the program. Has anything happened to you? I've got loads of things to talk about, Phil, but does anything stand out over the weekend to you, apart from obviously Leeds losing in the south of France, which was the biggest shock result of the year, I understand?
Yeah, would that be against the team that, other than in the Challenge Cup, haven't lost at home yet? Sure. Yeah, so that was a shock. No, I think the obviously London is the subject that everybody was talking about after this weekend, that they got their first win. I think the post-match analysis of Mike Eccles is worth watching and listening to if you haven't caught up with that already. You know, something that perhaps he hasn't felt able to say until he got that win on the board about how hard it's been for the club, and that the whole idea of the IMG grading system means that you start off your season already virtually knowing what your fate is for next season, and you're given that news just as the elation of promotion is taking place. I think it's worth listening to what he says, because we don't get that insight normally. I don't think it alters the fact that the principles behind grading just give London the illustration that, aside from what they achieved on the field last year, which was highly commendable, and Mike Eccles was a paragon of virtue throughout all of that, there's not enough underpinning it at the moment. So we can argue about catchment areas and whether that would give him another couple of points or not, but the club as a whole doesn't score in enough areas, be that fandom or finance or whatever it might be, to make them a sustainable top flight team. Hopefully the plan it gives them is that as and when and if, and hopefully they do come back, then they're in a position to stay there for a very long time. I think the other thing that is a contradiction, which he hints at quite rightly, is that when we first saw IMG come on the scene, they gave us their priorities for the sport, one of which was to build an entity in the capital. So they've now got that entity probably slightly earlier than was expected, even by the Broncos themselves. And we haven't really got a plan as to how we make that strategic. So there is a dislocation there in what they're saying and what they're doing. But I think fundamentally what they're doing is still right. But what he says is really well worth listening to. So yeah, that's the interview to get and a really good performance from a team that he said is still coming to terms with what being a Super League team is. I think the other thing that is noteworthy just happened before we came on air. Willie Peters, who's been linked with possibly a return to South Sydney or another NRL assistant coaching job, has signed a 4-year deal with Hull KR in the week leading up to the Challenge Cup semi-final, which again is a huge boost for them, because clearly a lot of the things that are happening there, be that recruitment, retention, and the confidence that the board have got in the players and the playing staff, I think again it's another lesson, and it's quite an object lesson for fans of some clubs that are calling for heads of coaches, is that you need stability if you're going to build something from the bottom up, rather than just focus on 17 people that might turn out every weekend in a first team fixture. Then there has to be that element of continuity there. So I think that's really big for Hull County, and it's great for the game over here as well. Whether or not that puts Sam Burdish in the front running for the South Sydney assistant job should Wayne Bennett take over, as discussed on this very podcast last week, who knows?
Shoulder charge, Sam. Just back to IMG, who are the convenient bogeymen for the moment, and it's great for everyone at the RFL. I have to remember Tony Sutton's the guy in charge, and he's the big. He doesn't get the stick anymore because it's this shadowy cabal of international sports marketers and people who know how to run things in the world of sport outside of rugby league in IMG. I was highly amused because if you're Keithley, you can say whatever you want because you've been firmly against and have your own ideas from day one. So if you're Keithley, you're fine. But clubs who voted for this plan, and I assume would have read through the plan because, we've got a general election coming up at some point. We'll all read the manifestos before we vote, won't we? We won't just be ticking and putting a cross into a certain box without reading, will we? No, we won't be doing that. So I assume all these clubs now, or club, who come out and say, well, I think IMG are getting this wrong. Well, hang on. You did vote for this, didn't you? You did vote for this. You read the book. I'm sure you did. You knew this was going to happen. What's changed?
I think there will be anomalies, and again, before he left Hull, Tony Smith was talking about there isn't enough weighting in junior development in there. I think there's a lot of focus put on the work that foundations do, which will include junior development links with community clubs. But I do think that that isn't stringent enough. Now, it may change once this system beds in a little bit, but I think fundamentally the reason why London are in the situation they're in is that it's not that they're almost a Toulouse or a Wakefield and they're on the cusp of coming back up. They were 24th out of 31. So even if the metric about catchment area, which I have some sympathy with, if you're the only club in the city of London, you should get maximum weighting under catchment, not just the borough that you happen to be in. But if you don't own your own ground, if you are a single person owner with no succession plan, if your academy is now no longer an elite listed academy, then there's certain things that you need to put in order that might run counter to the way your first team is going to make you a top flight club. And I think, I thought Mike Eccles was not only eloquent and his argument easily understandable, sympathetic to absolutely a lot of what he said, and hugely admiring of the job that he's doing down there. And as he points out, bringing players through almost without a safety net. It is all down to them, but it's not structured in the same way that it is in an academy or a scholarship system. Then if the game and IMG were serious about promoting the women's game and London, which were the two areas that they told us right at the very beginning that were priorities for them, then it does seem odd that there isn't some dispensation for that one club. Now, clearly, their argument is you start putting in dispensations at the very, very beginning of a process, and where do you stop? And that is a very fair argument, which ultimately is going to win the day. But I think you're right that I've seen some things on social media like you will have done, which may well include some pontifications from people who own rugby league clubs that basically says just because London have now won one game, they should stay up. You would also have to say, balancing out all of that if we bought in promotion relegation on the basis of today, London are bottom of the league, so they would get relegated. I know it's a 27 round season and there's lots of twists and turns to come, but all I'm saying is it's too late now to ditch a system that we've all agreed. There are people that don't agree with it, but we've the game it has signed up to move it forward. But his compelling argument is well worth listening to.
Just imagine if London had held on in the reverse fixture, they'd be on 4 points and Hull would be on 0, which goes back to that House Martins thing that someone posted, John posted on Twitter yesterday, but that's ancient history. It is funny though, because going back to Fulham, so 81,
80, 1980.
Wow, that's old. He says, going back all those millions of years to 1980. Then we're talking about plans for London still, and we've never had one. So
No,
the irony, of course, of plenty of people who would have been against London because they're taking money away from the north.
And that's where the game has to hold its hand up and say it's made, it's made an error in that, yes, they don't like to micromanage clubs, and David Hughes is the investor, and he has decided the direction that club is going to go in. But even from 1980, 1999, was it last week, the London Broncos were in the Challenge Cup final. They had a team with names that were easy to recognise. Some were established stars from over here, others had come from overseas. Richard Branson was leading them out, which again, in terms of entrepreneurs being attracted to a game unfamiliar to them, was fantastic. Virgin on their shirt at that time in 1999 meant a hell of a lot. But how did we capitalise on that? Well, the answer clearly is obvious. We didn't. We being the game as a whole. We didn't say this is a seminal moment in our sport. This is exactly what Super League. When Super League was created, it was to bring Paris and London, who did come in, Paris not for long, Madrid and Barcelona, who didn't. But the dream was, the modern summer game was going to be built as much around cities with new populations and new audiences as it was preserving the past. And at that moment, 1999 at Wembley, we had it. But as is so often the case in the history of rugby league, we let the damn thing go.
I should go back and read the books that you yourself, Mr. Doidge and Mr. Hannon, have written about the early days of Super League and see what's changed since those days. And the answer is probably, you can probably still read all about it in the latest issue of 4020, which features Mikey Lewis. There he is. Look, and if you listen to the podcast, you can't see him, but you can imagine him. I assume London Broncos do more with their women's team than just give them a name and some kit, but we'll see more of them coming up soon, I'm sure.
Well, again, that all needs more integration. London Roosters is the wheelchair team that represents the region, but there is absolutely no connection with London Broncos. All of that is part of the reason why they score as they do under gradings. Now, clearly, you don't get a section for your wheelchair team, but if your community is just you playing a men's first team game in a ground that is really nice, but you don't own, you're not going to score very highly on that. And I just think, we still laud the fact that Mike McMeekin is now moving from the south of France, where arguably was man of the match at the weekend, back to Wakefield for next season. Basingstoke's finest exponent of rugby league. But it's almost as if we get these jewels and then pick them off. We never sort of knit them together to make a necklace down in London. What a strange analogy that turned out to be.
Never forgiven Basingstoke for changing their name of the ice hockey team to Bison from Beavers. I don't know why they got rid of that. More Beavers to come, but different spelling later on. Well done, London. Well done, London. 34-18. Before we started recording, I did admit to Phil, I fell asleep during the first half. I've had trouble sleeping recently, and that first half was the tonic for it. But I woke up in time for Ollie Leyland's try. And everyone loves a bit of showboating, especially when it doesn't go wrong. So well done to him, and well done to London, and all those who sail in. And they get a week off this week for the Challenge Cup semi-finals, more of which to come later. Should we talk about Hull FC for a bit more? Because and I don't want this to turn into a weekly let's kick the boots into Hull FC, but it does seem to me that I don't watch much of Lee. They're on telly every week. But what I've noticed from Lee this year is perhaps the players they signed a couple of years ago, when they needed to sign a load of players because they just got promoted, and as every promoted team has to, they have to scramble around for players. So they signed a lot of experienced Super League players who probably coming towards the end of their careers, one of which being Zach Hardacre. And I'm not picking on him, but it becomes relevant. I think it'd be fair to say that his performances this year, not quite at the level as last year and going backwards, because he's getting older. And that happens to all players in any sport. I remember an analogy from the great John Gwynn, who I was working with on the darts at one point. And I asked him about Phil Taylor. This is when Taylor was coming towards the end of his illustrious career. And he said that the peaks are still there, but the troughs in between are getting wider. And it's not like Zach Hardick plays a bad game every week. He occasionally plays a good game as well. Would I be signing him if I'm Hull FC? Not a chance in hell. I'm very glad, as a Wakefield supporter, that he's not coming to my team. I don't understand this signing at all, but I'm not the director of rugby, so it doesn't matter what I think. But if you're planning for next year, that's the kind of signing you make if you're at the bottom of the table. I'm sorry to put it in those terms, but that's what it seems to be to me.
The thing that strikes me as being it's going to be very, very difficult for Hull to move on this year, which would be a desperate shame for the fans that have shelled out to watch them in great numbers at home and commendably travelled to London this weekend, is that Simon Grix is now starting to say exactly what Tony Smith was saying. That the group of players that they've currently got, there's quite a few of them are not going to be there next year. That they're coming off contracts and they're not doing themselves any favours, and the journey will continue, but without them. And you go, yeah, but you've got to play in 2 weeks' time. How are you going to take that group with you and get a performance out of them? One thing that struck me about Tony, and we featured it a bit in the magazine on that piece on youth, to which the front cover relates, is that he was talking about you do have to invest time in youth. That youth is your lifeblood of your team. But as certain others are seeing, if you put too many of them into an environment where the team isn't winning, then their transition to become Super League players takes that little bit longer. And fans have also got to be a little bit more patient with the results, because I'll use him as an example. We spoke about him last week. I thought Jack Sinfield played better this week in Perpignan than he did against London the week before. I thought he was taking the line on more. He seemed a little bit more confident in his judgments. He seemed a little bit more aware of who was running where and how he could influence that. He got in the right positions to put a lot of kicks in, because, again, clearly with Brodie Croft not being there was a little bit more onus on him to take some great responsibility. But he was also responsible for the inadvertent pass that Tom Johnson picked up and went the length of the field that effectively settled the outcome of that game. But, we should be forgiving Jack Sinfield anything like that, because it's all part of his development process. And what people tend to forget is that, the great team of the Leeds golden generation didn't arrive at Old Trafford in 2004 and win. Most of those players had started making their debuts from sort of 1997 onwards, were sort of together as a cohesive force, maybe 2002, 2003, had to lose some semi-finals and lose some finals until they became the unit that virtually made them indestructible. It doesn't happen overnight. And the same, is true at Hull. And the problem that they've got is that if you do invest in youth, but you demand success, and you start saying along the road of we're going to give youth a chance that some of the senior players aren't going to be there, then you haven't got that mix to bring them through, which makes it longer and harder, which I think Tony Smith had identified and was saying. And the other thing that Tony Smith kept saying was they weren't tough enough. He used the word tough on a number of occasions, that they needed to toughen up when they'd had some of their heavier defeats. And Simon Grix, again, who was somebody who is definitely worth listening to, speaks in a very measured fashion about exactly what's happening, and may well be getting the head coach's job at Hull for the rest of this season. Has just come out and said exactly the same thing. Now, it's really, really difficult when you look at the recruitment for next year to say, how is that necessarily going to change, unless you know what you want to look like, not next year, but in 3 years' time. And if you are going to sign Zach Hardick, if you are going to sign John Asiata, it's going to get you out of a hole maybe temporarily, but you're not fixing the issue that is causing the leak in the first place. So, again, we could all be proved wrong and they could be inspired signings, but I don't see what the vision is at the moment, and it might be too early anyway. But I'm with you that some of those signings don't hint of a long-term culture.
And the fascinating thing, of course, now is what do they do? Who do they bring in? Because they've obviously got time to prepare for next year to get rid of all these players who are coming towards the end of their contracts. And great to see Edwin Apape back out there and storming things. And what a result it was for Lee. 40 points to 12 over Salford. The great thing about this season is the unpredictability, as you mentioned before, Phil. And Salford going well, Lee not necessarily, but you can see they're building back now. They're getting players back, and that's a statement for them. 40 points to 12 over a decent Salford team. Very, very impressive. And Hanley's one of those young players who obviously is coming through with, again, the weight of having quite a surname on his shoulders, but he's been gradually eased into the team, and it's working well for them.
Yeah, I think he's found somewhere where the coaching staff have put their arm around him and said, "You are valued. We're not going to expect you to be anybody other than yourself. You've got a couple of attributes that we don't have in our team. One of which is, out and out pace, and that is a very, very valuable asset. And seems very keen to learn as well, which I think coachable would be the phrase that you'd use. I think it's really interesting because I didn't think this weekend was a great weekend in terms of quality of matches. What I did like was because we had the sun on our backs, it looked better, it sounded better. The teams with skill, and I would use here Wigan in the second half against Huddersfield. It doesn't matter to the same extent that matches are close and unpredictable if you can admire what Bevan French can do in those conditions. He's not slipping around all over the place because it's wet underfoot. It's forwards are not cancelling out the flick passes of backs because there is an element of the hand beats everything else in these conditions. And we've seen some great constructed tries. And I just think if you're going to be a summer sport, what we saw this weekend is what a summer sport should start to look like. But I think what we do know after 11 rounds of Super League is there are two teams, probably three if you include the Dragons, who I think are hanging in there, but by their own admission have been inconsistent. But there are three that probably are out there at the very top. And there are a group of probably six, maybe if you include Lee, who on any given day can come up with any given result. And whilst you probably put Hull KR at the top of those, they showed some vulnerability at Warrington on Thursday night. Warrington have been scraping some results, which is to their eternal credit, but they've got potentially the distraction of certainly a semi-final this weekend, maybe a final 2 or 3 weeks after that. And I think you can probably throw Lee into that now, that if they can keep Ipapi out there and they can put a little run together, then you've got that group of six that will make up the rest of the top six, which is not an unhealthy situation at all. Castleford, I think, this week went a step backwards. Again, if you enjoy watching the honesty of coaches' interviews, pick up Craig Lingard's, because he couldn't have painted a more honest picture of where they were in the second half of their game. And I think, we are looking at Hull and London as not being challengers much this year, because I just don't see what they've got in there. It's not like they're waiting for lots of players to come back and it's going to change. I think they are what they are, and London's endeavour will always be admirable. And Hull are just going through a really, really difficult phase where they have decided a third of the way in that they're going to change everything in the direction of which they were moving, and I think that will have repercussions for them this year.
For reasons that will become apparent, I want to get into Huddersfield in the second half of the programme, but just back to Lee for a moment. I know that everyone's very excited about the viewing figures on the BBC, which were revealed today. We've got no context as to what is usually on BBC Three at that time, and I've got to say, it's the cheapest coverage you could possibly put together. I mean, I didn't realise until a couple of days later that the feature they had at halftime with Celtic Gentles was already a rugby league thing that was going to go on YouTube in a couple of days. So there was no one knows it's on. I know of course people know it's on, but it's not as if they're signposting it. And on paper, this is no disrespect to Lee or Salford, by the way, because obviously it was an entertaining game, but they're not the sexiest clubs in rugby league, and people aren't going to, from outside our bubble, going to go, "Oh, Lee and Salford, what's that all about?" Then we're the best in the world. They're not those teams,
and I think that does link into the fact that the viewing figures were compared with the previous game on the BBC, which included Catalan, which has that exotic mysticism about it for people that don't follow the sport. Salford and Lee are great traditional names in the sport that have a certain degree of recognisability if you already know who they are. And what we're trying to do in this modern world where there's so many things competing for your eyeballs is try and put stuff out there that maybe people are a little bit more curious about, and they won't know who Catalan are, and it does sound exotic, and it is Perpignan, and what does that mean? And they have been in 2 of the last 3 grand finals. They did win the Challenge Cup. They did take a game to Barcelona. People will be hearing a little bit more about what they've brought to a sport that they're perhaps not familiar to. Whereas you have to be a bit of a rugby league nut to want to tune into Salford and Lee. I think the other thing as well that you have to bear in mind is that was on at a night when there were other games being played. So your rugby league audience is not all going to head off to BBC Three to watch that game, because they might have decided there was a better game on at the same time of rugby league on a different channel.
And the Catalans St Helens game would have been on a Saturday night, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So in a different time slot. So again, it's you're comparing apples and oranges. It doesn't work. I can compare the listening figures of this podcast week on week because it's usually out on a Monday night. So I know, and do I understand why they go up and down? No, I don't have a clue. But there's too many factors involved in TV figures where it's just too simple to say, well, that's a rubbish viewing figure. We don't know. We don't know if the BBC are happy. No one comes out and says, we're happy with these figures. And I think they need to put more into it, but that's just me. And maybe they don't on BBC Three on a Friday night. Maybe that's just me. I don't know.
I also think that you look at the whole BBC package and what they bring to the sport, and the deal that's been done with them that it now includes some Super League games is to enhance our presence on our national broadcaster. And when you tune in this weekend and you've got 2 men's and 2 women's semi-finals, and it is all the bells and whistles and it is prime time slots, and I think we have every reason to expect that there'll be 4 great games. They won't turn out that way because they never do. But going into them, you would think that the BBC will be allocating every available resource, and we will look fantastic if the weather is again anything like it was this weekend. And we need them to have Super League rights to 10, 15, 20 games a season for 3 years, and then look back at the figures.
Can they be doing more on their social media? Yes, they can. Can they be doing more on their website? Yes, they can, because I get sick of hearing about the NBA or whatever. But that's IMG's job. So work out what they're going to do. Before the break, which for the podcast people, I'm too cheap to pay for Zoom, so we have to do 2 Zooms. We may as well clear up Castleford St Helens. A tight first half, red cards, which we haven't seen for a while, so that was nice to see. And then St Helens ran away with things in the second half. Jack Wellesby playing up his role as kind of the modern day Sean Edwards, if you will. And he's a better celebration after a try, but Saints are back now, so that's good for them. Second in the table going into this Challenge Cup weekend.
Yeah, the thing for Saints is, whilst it will absolutely hurt them not to be in a semi-final this weekend, they can now go into the break refreshed and rejuvenated, and maybe even get the likes of Iggy Parsley back for when the Super League resumes, which will give them an extra element. Yeah, they'll miss Tommy Makinson for the first game back.
Well, can he use a reserve game? Or is he not allowed to do that?
Can he go on loan to Rochdale or something? I don't. But no, the second half, whilst displaying all the attacking wares that St Helens have in their armoury, and great to see, Conrad Hurrell and Wonga Blake coming up with the goods, and it looks like they've got a partnership that's going to make it very interesting for Saints to decide if they want to sign either one or both of them again. That capitulation by Cass, again, happened against Huddersfield, didn't it? And Craig Lindard came out and said, not good enough. Some players, won't be playing next week if that's what they're going to serve up. And again, unless you've got 40 players, you can't keep going back to that well either. So extremely disappointing for Cass. I didn't think we saw that coming, that there was a gradual improvement, that the some of the lone players that they got in that were giving them more experience was going to sort of turn their overall form around. So no, Saints again were coming off a period where people were saying, yeah, they're towards the top, but they haven't been convincing. And you see the halftime score and you think, yeah, that's a measure of Castleford improving. Let's now see what Saints have got. And then you think, wow, they just scored 52 points in 40 minutes. There's, clearly something not quite right. And a shame for Paul McShane, who made his 350th career appearance, and I would imagine he would want to forget.
I'm going to say that is the most important swap deal in rugby league, that one. Because what if we got Scott Moore and stayed up, and Castle would have had a player who went on to win Man of Steel and League Leaders Shield and everything else. I can't think of anyone that's been more important. And what is amazing about Castle is, despite the fact they've only won 2 games, in his seniors, the third highest try scorer in the competition with 10. Bizarre things. But again, they get the week off this week as well. And as you say, perhaps it goes both ways, doesn't it? We'll come back in 2 weeks' time after the semi-finals and after the next round of games, and people will go, well, the break hasn't done them good, or it has done them good. So it's all a narrative we can work on in that time. Before the break, then, is there anything else we can clear up before we get stuck into Huddersfield? Because I want to get stuck into Huddersfield, not the players, but the club itself. There's nothing else to say about Cantlands and Leeds, was there? Because that went as without. My opinion on Rowan Smith is, and it doesn't matter what I think about him as a coach or whatever, he's never going to win those people over who have decided he's rubbish. So I don't know what he does. I didn't listen to his press conference after the match because coaches don't tend to say anything particularly interesting anyway. So.
The narrative during the commentary was interesting because it was clear that John Wilkin was making some interesting points about where he thought there were deficiencies in the Leeds squad and their style of play, and there does need to be a more in-depth conversation about passive defence. And John did produce some stats saying, territorially that, Leeds almost invite the opposition into them and hope that, or expect that they will manage that and go up the other end and score more points, which is exactly what they did in 2022 and did work when Rowan Smith came in. I don't think there was enough context given in some of their discussions, whilst John Wells did try to give some. And, clearly I am an apologist and I am a fan of continuity. And I do think there are certain things you can point to that have happened in the Rowan Smith era that are more commendable and outweigh more than, just ditching him because you don't like the fact that they've lost this week. But I would say that you take 7 players of your likely starting 17 out of any side, you're A, not going to score a lot of points, and B, you're probably not going to win a game. So, for me, that was more of the context that, Leeds have struggled to score points this year, but Brodie Croft leads the competition in terms of try assists. So if you take him out and people like Harry Newman and Paul Momorowski and David Fusitu'a, should he ever not be made of chocolate, and, you're going to be limiting your attacking threat. But what I would say is, I don't know, we've discussed culture a lot of times on this program and how hard it is to define and what it means. I think one of the things everybody is generally agreed on is that it's the willingness to work for each other. It's your scramble defence. It's looking after your mate at the side of you, whatever that means. It's caring about your performance. And certainly in defence, until the last 4 minutes of that game, there wasn't a lot wrong with what Leeds were doing. With a depleted squad. So, well done to Catalan for getting back on the horse. Great Artemore try, which is always good to see. And they will, as Steve McNamara was saying, they are going to refresh and reset and use this break to clear up some of the players they've got in their squad that have played a bit busted. And I expect them in the next phase of the season up to Wembley to be difficult to beat. But no, I think, let's say, as we said it earlier in the pod, Leeds are in that group of teams that have a chance of making the playoffs this year. And if they do, that will be a better performance than last year. If they don't, with the players that they've signed, it will be disappointing, and they'll be soul searching.
Professionalism, of course, is a biscuit tin falling off during the programme. But unfortunately, the biscuit tin
is empty.
When we come back, we've got loads to talk about. The break is like 30 seconds long or something, depending on where YouTube put the adverts. But it's Magic Weekend in Australia, and it's the women's Origin as well. So there's it's all on Sky. So no one can complain about the big games not being on and having to watch some rubbish. So that's exciting. So we've got Magic, women's Origin, and 4 semi-finals of the Challenge Cup because the 2 wheelchair ones aren't being televised. What a weekend it's going to be, and we'll talk all about that and stick the boot into the Huddersfield Giants organisation on the way after this excitingly short break. So welcome back. Before we get stick the boot in, we need to find out if there's a record, because the consecutive goal kicks by Stefan Ratchford, what was that? Is it 49 or 39 or something? 20 something.
Yeah, 41, I think. Super.
Because I don't know what the record is in the women's game, but Emma Knowles of Wigan got 21 in a row before missing the last 3 in their game at Huddersfield on Saturday. She got 15 out of 18 plus the ones from the week before. So I was listening to the commentary on Wigan TV, so thanks to Wigan for providing that. Because we've got to talk about this. Huddersfield 0, Wigan 102, which frankly, and this is no criticism of the players because it's not them who did it, but as soon as Huddersfield made those big statements last year, which were gobbled up by people without questioning that they were now professional, well, square that circle for me, because I don't think Wigan didn't come out and say we're professional or anything. And I know Saints are starting match payments and York have contracts and Leeds or whatever Leeds are and the other clubs are. As far as I'm aware, they're all amateurs. They may be getting boot money, I don't know. But as soon as you come out and make a statement saying we're professional, despite the massive holes in that statement, like a colander, you can't come out and lose 102-0 in the same division as teams that you're supposed to be rivaling. And you also can't, as a club, say you're having a double header, but then you charge people to go in for the first game, then they have to leave the stadium and pay to come back in. Leeds do double headers, you pay. York do double headers, you pay to go in. I think Barrow have got this great idea where if you turn up early for the women's game, you get in free and then you spend money behind the bar and then you watch the men's game. What a great idea. I've never known a double header to be organised like this. Frankly, it's ridiculous, absurd, stupid. And you can't call yourselves professional and do something like that. I think it's frankly, I'm not going to take anything away from Wigan because obviously they played very well. And I'm not criticising the players at Huddersfield. But when the club comes out and says things and it's anything but, got to call it out.
I think you can't call it a double header, can you? You know,
well, no,
double header is you get 2 events for the price of 1. Wembley is going to be a triple header if you include the schoolboys game, a quadruple header, but you're not asked to pay 4 times to go into the national. So you pay once. The joy of your ticket. The NRL will have it with their Magic Weekend this weekend. You don't have to pay for each game you want to watch. You pay for a ticket for either the day or the weekend. You cannot claim you are hosting a double header when you've got the same opposition in town. So it's like even more ideal to have a double header and get both sets of fans in to watch both games if it's not a double header. So no, I think you're right to question what does professionalism mean. They have made some squad improvements. I think we've looked at some of the signings that they've made and said that should make them more competitive. They put Laurie Halloran in charge, which I think people around the women's game said that's going to be great because it's career progression and that's exactly what we want to see. But arguably, where they are in the table after the first few rounds, and you have to say it does depend very much on who you've played, they're worse than they were last year.
Obviously, we can't quite say how good Wigan are because, as you mentioned, they haven't played one of those top 3 sides yet, but they've obviously improved. And I keep going back to them. If I look at this league table and I've got Huddersfield at the bottom, Super League club with all that entails, they should not be below Barrow, who are a championship club who don't have the resource, but and they have lost all 3 of their games, Barrow. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to say something here, but they lost narrowly at Wigan in the first game. They lost narrowly at Warrington this week. Whatever Barrow are doing to develop the women's game in their area is obviously working because they're putting out a competitive team. They may have lost all 3 of their matches, but they have been competitive. And when they play Huddersfield, I would fancy them to beat Huddersfield. Now, whatever Barrow are doing should be, other clubs should be looking at, and certainly teams in Super League, because I can understand if championship teams have different priorities. But teams in the men's Super League who have a women's team who are virtually, we're just giving them a kit and a name and that's it. How do you square that circle then, that Barrow are doing what they're doing with the resource they've got and appear to be successful? It doesn't make sense to me. And that should be what everyone should be looking at Barrow now and going, well, if they can do it, we can do it. There's no Hull side in the Super League. Neither Hull FC nor Hull KR.
I think there is a commitment that you need to show that the women's team is a valuable part of whatever this one club mentality is. And a lot of clubs say they do it, and some clearly do. So, you know, Wigan have embraced the idea that it's not just about the men's running team anymore. And it's not solely about the fact that they, you know, appointed Dennis Betts as their women's coach. It's they've got junior development. They play under 19 games, and some of those players are coming through into the first team. There is a pathway there. Leeds do it under Lois Forsell. That, you know, part of her job before she became more the full-time women's coach was she was involved in women's and girls development in the city. And again, that's paying off. And, you know, Gary Hetherington's view of the club is, yes, clearly the main driver, getting people into Headingley on a Friday night and spending money in the corporate, will be the men's running team. But, you know, they were, to use the word that you just said, incredibly professional when the team got to Wembley last year. You know, they were running corporate trips as if it was the men's team, and they were offering the opportunity to, you know, for the women to, you know, have luxury hotels in the same way that the men's team would, and a breakfast to see them off. And, you know, it's not about necessarily money, it's about how you make them feel. And then you contrast that to the way Castleford looked at their women's team. You know, you got to get changed on the bus, you got to play on the training field that would, you know, it is, you know, possibly, you know, going to break your ankle if you get the wrong bit of it. And, you know, and we'll give you the name, but we don't really value you, and we're not going to put any resource to you. And then, you know, that becomes the germination of what was the rise of York, because they did value their women's team. In fact, in terms of all of the clubs that value their women's team, you might say York value theirs more than any others, because actually their men's team at the moment isn't at the level of the other men's teams. And you just get a feeling that Huddersfield went down the road that Castleford did, in the sense of, there's some shirts. You can play at Huddersfield YMCA or Lord Hill or whatever it's called. Very occasionally, we'll bring you in. We'll make a big deal about our best player, Amelia Brown, signing a contract which will enable us to tell everyone that we're professional. But that's not enough. It is not enough. I don't know how much strength and conditioning access the Huddersfield players have. Is it the same as the men's? I don't know how much their recovery is part of the men's. I don't know if they've all got the same kind of insurance cover that you know, or if they need to get treatment, they've got to wait in an A&E queue. I don't know what Huddersfield are doing for their women's team, and I'm sure if they're listening to this, they will tell us. But you get the impression from what is happening on the field that perhaps it isn't the same as what Saints have decided to do, what even Warrington are now starting to do, what certainly the clubs at the top, York, Wigan and Leeds, are doing, what Barrow are doing, because they again can see where their men's team are, but the value of their women's team commensurately is as much. That appointing Amanda Wilkinson, you know, is a masterstroke for Barrow, and they do have access to the best women in Cumbria. But as you have quite rightly pointed out, they are far in excess of some much bigger names who don't seem to have grasped what you can do with the women's team without actually diverting too many of resources away from the men's.
York were the other team that Barrow have played, and it was up in Barrow, and they weren't embarrassed on the scoreboard. I can't remember what the scoreboard was, but it was
8 or something like that.
Yeah.
It was credible.
So I you know, I just question people who parrot PR statements from clubs, and that's what the Huddersfield professionalism thing was, and it's being borne out right now in the league. I know we're only 3 games in, but it's being borne out. You don't lose 100 points. And I mean, I saw Wakefield lose 100-0 to Castleford before Castleford, you know. It shouldn't happen in the league. It should not happen in a Super League.
Where we weren't claiming to be professional at that time.
No, we certainly weren't. And it's sad to see where they are now, and it's sad to see where Castleford are now and where Bradford are now. And if you look at that first Super League Grand Final, was Bradford versus Featherstone. and both have regressed for whatever reason. Now we know Bradford obviously lost a lot of players, key players to Leeds and St Helens and wherever now, but Barrow are the standard bearers for those outside of the top clubs to say that you can do something, obviously on a budget. And Wigan have got a budget. It's my understanding they made a fairly hefty financial offer to one player, an international player, a recognisable player in the off season, and that player didn't choose to leave their club to go to Wigan. So they've obviously decided that they're going to put something into this, and they'll run Leeds close this week. They'll run Leeds closer than people think.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I don't know if we're talking about the women's results this weekend. That was a fabulous win for the Leeds at York.
We may as well while we're here. Featherstone 4, St Helens 58, Wigan 102-0 over Huddersfield. This is the thing where people say they should handicap the Challenge Cup and get the bookmakers involved to handicap the matches. You can't, because they gave Wigan a 30-point start in that game. Warrington 10, Barrow 6, and York 10, Leeds 16 on the sports from yesterday, which was good. And important win for Leeds. Lindsay Anfield not happy afterwards with perhaps the desire of her team, and hoping that kicks them up the backside for this week's game against St Helens. Hoping that they, I can't remember what the exact word she used, but she was thumping, that was it. I'm not saying that's Maddie Smith's team talk done for this week, but the pressure's on the York this week because they haven't been to Wembley yet, and Saints have won 3 Challenge Cups in a row or whatever. They suddenly become Wigan-esque, if you will, in that sense, but all the pressure's on the York for that semi-final, for my opinion. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it was great to see Caitlin Beavers back playing for Leeds and obviously scoring one and creating the other of their tries. Great to see Kira Bennett back as well, because I think she's one of the most exciting young hookers in the women's game, and has had some injury and suspension issues. Obviously missed Wembley last year. But I didn't think Leeds would win at York. I think, York pride themselves on the fact that, that grand final that they won at their home ground last year against that opposition was the springboard to say, we're here. We can, we can now put down our marker as the leading women's team. And I think we're going to a fascinating weekend of semi-finals, genuinely not knowing which of those teams will go to Wembley. So, no, I think Saints and York could be fascinating. It's 11:15 kickoff, I think, in Doncaster. It's certainly early. And then Leeds and Wigan 12:30 at Saints on the Sunday. Again, the unity that Wigan seem to have, it's like Wigan, they've decided it's not necessarily about recognisable names. They've got some clearly England quality players, but you don't automatically think of individuals when you talk about that Wigan team. And there's something that Dennis Betts is doing to mould them into more of a unit and bringing a lot of young players through that understand the Wigan way, in the same way that Matty Peet has done with the men's team. And Leeds are more a team of recognisable names and superstars. But it'll be really interesting to see when the pressure is on how they've gelled this year.
As somebody who saw her at Wakefield, obviously as a junior, well, she's still a junior. The development of Emma Kershaw as a player is fascinating, and playing alongside Carrie Roberts, as she appears to be learning from. It's interesting to see how far she will develop as a talent in the next years. And of course, we'll have the players going to the NRLW soon enough. Hopefully for the coaches, announced not a week before the season as it was last year, but we'll see what happens there. So we'll stick with Huddersfield. I'll go back to them rather, because they're men on the crest of a wave in terms of form, and then Wigan turn up and obliterate them in the second half of that one. 6-12 at half-time, but 48-6 by full-time. A great Wigan performance, and they are looking ominous. They are looking ominous at the moment.
Yeah, and I don't think it matters. I mean, clearly they've got some star names around which they build quite a lot of what they do, and the key one is Bevan French. And if he wasn't there for whatever injury, which we hope want to see him play every single game this season, because he's just one of those players that you do want to pay to go and watch, and you do want on television as often as you can, and you do want neutrals identifying with this supremely talented guy who's now signed to stay around for longer. But I just you look at Wigan and you think, well, where would be if you were previewing them for this week on the way they played in that second half, where is their weakness? and I can't see it. They've got two fantastic hookers who are very different. That you can either leave on or exchange to change the way that the game goes. Liam Byrne's got a disciplinary problem. He's going to miss the semi-final. Doesn't really matter when you look at, the fact that Ethan Havard is made such an impact when he came on. I just think at the moment, they may have the odd blip like they did at Hull KR. But Liam Marshall is such a fantastic finisher at the moment. Jake Wardle, again, would walk into the England team if it was selected at the moment. Adam Kieran is starting to look like the Adam Kieran that played at Catalan last year. Abbas Miski again went looking for work when it didn't come to him, which is, if you can have that of your wingers, it rubs off on your forwards. I just don't see at the moment anything that would say that they won't be at Wembley at the beginning of June, which clearly means Hull KR are going to win on Saturday.
Well, there is the potential for Wigan to be in and win all three Challenge Cups, because they play Leeds in both the women's and wheelchair semi-finals this weekend. The other one is London versus Catalans in that competition, the reigning champions, holders, that was the word I was looking for. So it could be, as we say, Wigan, this one club mentality, and it could be borne out this weekend and in June as well, when we get to those finals. We do know who will be at Wembley, because Sheffield Eagles beat York 28-18, and Wakefield came from behind to beat Bradford 40 points to 14 to set up a rematch of the 1992 Yorkshire Cup Final, a final which Mark Aston played in, of course. And it will be a final coached by two Sheffield Hall of Famers. Was Dalpel their first ever signing, I think?
Well, it depends. I think Mark Gamson was their first, as in literally the first person to put pen to paper. But the one who arguably is the talisman that they built the team around, along with Mark Aston, was Darryl Pan.
There's quite a lot of history that you can go between those two men, let alone the clubs themselves going into the 1895 final. So it's going to be interesting.
I think the great thing for that is to see what the crowd will be, because we said last week that there's growing importance in this competition, and that for clubs outside of Super League, particularly in the IMG era, who may well have to wait their turn to get points in other areas than just performances on the field, what they will get is the opportunity to go to Wembley. And the Bradford Wakefield game was quite rightly built up as being, the return to the big stage of one of these teams. Wakefield are going for the first time since 1979, and we actually saw pictures today on social media of people queuing to get their tickets.
They do know they won't sell out. They do know that, don't they?
But going online, not downloading an e-ticket, they queue to, and that shows what it means to the people of Wakefield. I suspect that not only will this be the biggest 1895 crowd, but it could be close to 10,000. And you're talking about then an event where if they do get there and watch the men's and women's games beforehand, we'll get a lot nearer to selling out Wembley, and people will have to stop saying, oh, we have to move it, or it's outlived it's nostalgia and romance. If you get 7,000 or 8,000 Wakefield fans there, and two or three maybe supporting Sheffield, and they're there to watch the men's cup final, and possibly, if the bars are open long enough, the women's as well, then there'll be 65,000 guaranteed at Wembley this year, maybe touching 70, which is great for the game.
I have seen people say, and it's expensive to go to London, I know that, but I've seen people saying, well, they should play the final in the north. No, because if you played the 1895 Cup Final in Hull, who cares? It's all about Wembley. It's always been all about Wembley, because it's about selling tickets and, get some more bums on seats in the stadium once we've hired it for the day.
People are queuing up because of the sense of occasion. And you don't get, if you're going back to somewhere after 40 odd years, it's not the same if you keep moving the final around. You're not going back anywhere. Paul Cook was talking in his column previewing the 1895 semi-finals in the magazine about, one of the regrets he's got is not that he won the Challenge Cup. It's an amazing memory. But it was at the Millennium Stadium in Wales, and he never got to play at Wembley. And because he's a traditionalist and he loves the sport and he loves what that competition stands for. He wanted to say he played at Wembley, so don't move it anywhere other than Wembley.
Top two teams in the championship as well, going into that game as well at the moment, and they may well be going into that game as well. So I'm looking forward to all the history being dredged up over that fixture, which is shame. Which is Wakefield haven't been there since 1979. Sheffield Eagles didn't exist in 1979. You know, just to put some context on that, and obviously may not have existed going into this one. And the story of that club is the sheer bloody mindedness of Mark Aston and the people backing it, that they didn't roll over and die when the merger came around in 2000, and that they still exist and indeed won the cup a few years ago. Who knows? They may well win it again at Wembley in less than a month's time. I don't know if people were queuing up in Sheffield. I think people in Sheffield realised the internet exists.
Yeah.
You know, Wakefield were, I don't know what we are, but we've got a kit out. We've got a new kit out for it, so that's good.
Well, I saw your comment. What would have happened if you'd have lost to Bradford when
the shadowy cabal of the people who tweet on the 4020 live account. Yeah, there was something else about that game that was it. Yeah, it's quite funny because obviously everyone in Wakefield, Matt Ellis, he walks on water at the minute, and I'm not going to say he doesn't or not, but the amusing thing is, of course, had Mr. Carter not been involved and those around in the club may not have existed, but also if the club hadn't been relegated last year, if they hadn't built a stand and put money into players, say, the chances of getting to Wembley this year would not quite have been the same.
No, 100%, 100%. And that, you know, they're not yet nailed on a Super League place by their gradings rating. They've certainly moved a long way down that road to ensure that they will, because we know that, as we said at the beginning of the programme, London are not going to be there. Therefore, somebody has to take their place, you would say, where we sit at the moment with everything they're doing, and particularly the ground renovation. You know, the fact that it's there and in situ is Carter. And, you know, Matt Ellis is not lucky to come into that. But, you know, this could have been starting a year later, in which case they wouldn't have had enough points to necessarily go up at the end of this season. Then, you know, I think it's a great story of both clubs, and you would hope that whoever wins, they're going to build on the back of it, because that hasn't happened enough in the past. That you know, Sheffield won the Challenge Cup in '98, and you know, a year later they were forced into a merger that they didn't want because they weren't strong enough to stand up to that. They probably didn't at that time, because of the resource that they had, do quite enough to, you know, cement their work in the local community to build up quickly on the back of that, which is very hard when you're trying to deal with a sport that, you know, a lot of people in the city haven't even heard of. So let's hope that whether it's Wakefield or Sheffield, you may have a preference. I possibly couldn't comment on that. That they get value out of winning the 1895 Cup, and what we see next year is even more clubs saying, my grading might not get me promoted, but what I need is a doubt, like what those two clubs have had. I need, you know, the Swinton fans need to take their supporters, you know, break the Holy Grail and you know, go to Wembley, and you know, the same for Dewsbury or whoever, Halifax. You know, there's so many great clubs with history and tradition out there, or even a new club. You know, why shouldn't Cornwall, who this weekend,
yes,
arguably had their, you know, one of their great results, winning at Midlands Hurricanes. Why shouldn't they say, look, if we, you know, if we set a course for Wembley, that could be a massive boost for what we're trying to do in all the other parts of our business.
It's a great sporting city, Sheffield, of course. Just had the snooker there. Unfortunately, the football teams are rubbish, but the ice hockey team won their treble this year. They've had the trophies in the City Hall. Maybe the 1895 Cup will be there as well. Or maybe it will be an open-top bus tour around Wakefield. I don't know how much of Wakefield you can get around in an open-top bus. The areas of Wakefield I won't want to go around in an open-top bus. And I can say that because I'm from here. Maybe Jay McDonald will come back. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But now I've thought about it. The people who want David Fafita to lead out the team at Wembley, you're idiots. You are idiots, and I'm not afraid to say that. I don't care anymore. I've got to say things because, you know, you can't bottle things up. That's what they tell you.
Stick in the corporate, fine, but don't get him to lead the team out. This team and this club is not the club that he played for.
However, if you said to me, someone from the 60s when we were quite good, then yeah, they can be involved. That's fine. But play with 1-0. Play 1-0.
Yeah, Jason Dimitri could come over.
Yeah, not doing that. We could get the whole job while he's at it. Well done, Cornwall. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? Midlands win away in Cumbria for the first time ever, then lose to Cornwall. What's going on there? 24-22. Sound like a cracking game, especially having been 16-6 up at halftime, Midlands. So great comeback from Cornwall as well.
Last minute try and conversion.
It's all exciting. This week's fixtures in the Championship: Toulouse Barrow on Saturday, and the rest of them are on the Sunday. Bradford Sheffield, Dewsbury Fev, Doncaster Batley, Wakefield Swinton in the Martin Calner derby, Widnes versus Whitehaven, and York versus Halifax. I mean, that is a huge game there, because York obviously struggling, but so are Halifax as well. So have been knocked out of the 1895 this week. That will be a big win for Halifax, for York, if they can see off the Panthers on Sunday.
Yeah, I think that there'll be concerns if York don't win, mainly because I don't know where their season goes from here if they can't start climbing the table relatively rapidly. And they were touted as playoff contenders and are propping up everyone else at the moment.
I know the reasons why, but it's still stupid that Wigan's men and women are not playing on the same day in the semi-finals. I just... Going back to the Huddersfield point, you want to give everyone as much of an opportunity to see their women's club as possible, because they haven't got into that habit yet. So we're trying to build habits. So if we give it before a match, you say you may drift in at half time of it, you may come for the full match, you may only turn up for the last 10 minutes, but you might get the buzz. I don't know, but it's just stupid. I don't understand. I mean, I understand some of the logistical reasons why, because they don't want St Helens women to play at St Helens, but still, again, it doesn't make any sense to me. But I'm sure there's a very obvious reason that's staring me in the face, but obviously I don't understand it. Who's going to win? Who's going to win the semi? We've got 6 semi-finals. Who's going to win them? We can predict these and get them completely wrong. It doesn't matter.
I think the only one I'm feeling relatively confident is that I do think the Catalan Dragons wheelchair team will beat London Roosters. I don't 100% know who's going to win the other game, but I think that Leeds are carrying something about getting to finals last year and not winning them, that they want to try and redress that. So I'm going to go a repeat of last year's wheelchair final with Leeds and Catalan. As for the women's, I think St Helens will beat York, not because there's any difference in standard between the two teams. I just think this is St Helens' competition at the moment, and they don't give it up. And I think you were right earlier when you said that there's now pressure on York. So going into that game, I think York will be questioning themselves. Lindsay Anfield's obviously, as you mentioned, said, have they got desire in an effort to fire them up? And I think we saw in the league game, first round of the Betfred Women's Super League, that York got off to a flyer, but actually, Saints not only pulled themselves back into the game, but for a couple of errant decisions towards the back end of the second half, very nearly won that game. And it was only a piece of individual brilliance from Carrie Roberts that carried York through that day. So I'm going to go Saints to win that one. I think you're right that we saw the semi-final between Leeds and Wigan last year that was a lot closer than everybody thought it was going to be.
And the one the year before was in the playoffs as well, wasn't it? I think that's proof of Wigan's growth year on year as well.
And I think they'll go into that as the underdogs, which will really suit them. But I just think Leeds have got too many big game players. So as you're probably not surprised here, I think it's going to be a repeat of the Leeds St Helens women's final from last year. The men's, I haven't got a clue. I think you'd have to say on the form that we saw last week, which you can ignore because it never translates itself into semi-finals. I think you'd say that it's going to be a Wigan-Warrington final, but again, Huddersfield will feel that not that their season is anywhere near on the line. They've still got a say in finishing in the playoff positions, but if you're going to set down a marker for what you're going to do in the rest of the season, then and you're going to try and get to a Challenge Cup final and redress the fact that you probably didn't put in your finest performance against Wigan because you became inhibited at Spurs, then I don't think Huddersfield will roll over. But I do think there's almost a sense of destiny about Sam Burgess getting to Wembley this year. And again, you would say, wouldn't you, on the way that they played this week, that Hull KR coming off a really disappointing performance where their right edge looked anything but solid against a Wigan team that can punish it. Yeah, their left edge will be rubbing their hands in review this week about what they can do, as will Jai Field with his cut-out passes and Bevan French with his trickery. So, yeah, I think I'm going to go an all west of the Pennines, Wigan Warrington men's final.
I forgot we didn't really talk about the Warrington Hull KR game, but it was so long ago it doesn't matter anymore. But you picked out the important point there. That edge defence was the one that Warrington obviously exploited. And I tell you what, the good news for Wigan is I've backed Jai Field to score a try for the last few weeks because I think he's close to a milestone and he's got nowhere near. So I'm not going to back him this week. So he'll score about 4 tries against Hull KR. So that's the good news for Wigan fans. Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with any of your picks, I'm afraid, which is great news for everyone who's now going to look forward to a Hull KR, Huddersfield and York versus Wigan final. I'd say it's going to be great.
Happy to be proved wrong on all of them.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it will only expose the fact that
we don't know anything.
I know nothing.
I mean, the concern for me from York would be if Tara Jane Stanley's fully fit or not, because she didn't, I don't want to say she didn't look fully fit on Sunday, but it looked like she was carrying some kind of, I think they said to her elbow or something, but all they've got to go is back 12 months and Faye Gaskin's drop goal. And that's got to play on the mind. I know they won the grand final, but now they've won the grand final. And I think I said this to Lindsay Anfield at the launch. It's all about this Wembley now, because this is the next thing that you haven't won, and we're going to beat you with this stick until you do. And it's not getting to Wembley in the first place.
Not only that, but I think we would be foolish not to acknowledge that whilst it takes a champion team to win the Super League and an element of luck of the draw to win a cup, to play at Wembley elevates that women's team. There will be people that haven't seen York as a team play on the stage, even though they've won the grand final. You put them on BBC 1 or 2 or wherever it'll be at Wembley, led out, you know, in the traditional pomp and circumstance that we associate with the Challenge Cup, and that takes your club to another level. So they do need to get to Wembley. And I do think as well, and people again who know the women's game certainly better than we do, I think Sinead Peach is a really big miss, and clearly I wish her absolutely nothing but success with her pregnancy and becoming a mum for the first time. But so much of what York did last year was built around her, the way she forced her way back into the England team because of the way she played. You take that out at relatively short notice. It's not like, you know, you break a leg in pre-season training and you go, right, well, we need to find a way of accommodating that until you're back. You know, that is an absence that you almost couldn't fill when it happened. And whilst York will probably now win 44-0, I just fancy Saints on the big stage.
This is the thing we're going to be talking. Well, I don't know if we'll still be podcasting in 20 years. I don't think we will be, because podcasting won't exist. The world will have blown up by then anyway. But we're going to be talking about all the people who replace us. We're going to be talking about the next generation of children from female players, be they male or female or whatever, playing their variant of rugby league. That's going to be the next thing we're going to be talking about. I should say, because I've forgotten, and I forgot to mention it last week, and I've put the email up in front of me because someone emailed us the other week about the women in league, the women in rugby league. They're doing a thing on the pioneering years, which is quite funny because I was the 1991 Premiership programme put up yesterday, included an article on women's rugby league in the early 90s. And on the next page after, there was one of those cartoons which featured the comically large breasts of some woman who was drawn with blonde hair, whatever. The great dichotomy of that. I think that's the word I'm looking for. The women in rugby league people looking for stories, memorabilia stuff. We're going to get them on the programme in the future when they reply to my email. But you can find them on Twitter at Women in Rugby LG, and all the details are there. And I think they won an award the other week as well. So we've got to celebrate the history which is being created as we speak.
Yes.
History. One of the most historic days in the history of something I saw the other day was someone tweeting. I thought that's tend to be how history works, and it is tend to be how it works. I think that's it. I think we've done everything, haven't we? I don't think there's anything else left. Next week, then, we'll be reflecting on the semi-finals and seeing how wrong we've been about everything, because we're always wrong.
Which won't be the first time.
Are you off to the semi-finals, Phil?
I'm going to both venues, all games. Really looking forward to them.
Oh,
I suspect that keeping an eye on the wheelchair as well, because as you rightly said at the beginning, as far as we know, no coverage of those this weekend. And we may have a wheelchair coach on the program next week to reflect on those same things.
it's like Alan Partridge. He's going to come. He's just on the roundabout now. But yeah, so we've got that to look forward to.
He wanted to wait until the semi-finals, so
then after the final, then
if his team doesn't win, we won't see.
There's something else I was going to mention that I can't for the life of me remember what it was now. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh, thanks to BBC Cumbria as well for doing the commentary and the Warrington Barrow game I listened to, while trying to listen to Wigan and Huddersfield at the same time. Which no, they played Sunday, didn't? So I was trying to listen to that while watching York and Leeds, and it got confusing at one point. But about Wigan +6, that was happy days.
Could I just proffer congratulations to everybody that took part in the Leeds Marathon at the weekend?
Oh yes.
Not just the Leeds Marathon, but the Rob Burrow Leeds Marathon, because it was an uplifting event just to be at. Never mind, didn't expend any effort whatsoever other than in a retail capacity. But the volunteers were fantastic. The organisation was superb, and the people that commit to run either half or full marathons deserve nothing but our admiration and thanks for the money that they raise for the charities that they represent. And it can rival the Great North Run and the London Marathon. 14,000 people and harmony throughout. It was just wonderful.
Just need to get it on TV because that's the only difference between it. There's no difference. It's just running in the same distance, unless there was that one where they got the distances wrong. But I assume in Leeds everything's perfect. So fingers crossed. I'm sure they got a medal and stuff. And
got a medal.
So Kevin was there. Doing another marathon.
They got a T-shirt to say they'd completed in a little goodie bag which I know had a Mars bar in it amongst some.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'll buy one off eBay and then pretend I've done it because that's what people do these days. The magazine is out now in all good shops and via subscription. Details on the bottom of this video or on the podcast or whatever. We'll be back next week. You enjoy Doncaster and St Helens. I'll enjoy watching it on the sofa and getting confused with the NRL on at the same time.
But enjoy your viewing weekend, everyone.
And yeah, that's it. So leave comments because I like it when people say we're professional, but leave them on iTunes as well. Then we can go further up the charts because some weeks we're still below out of our league and they haven't done a podcast for months. So what's that all about?